I had nothing left. No money, no dignity, and a daughter who deserved a better father than the broken old man I had become. My name is Salim, and for 63 years, I believed that if you worked hard and kept your head down, life would eventually show you mercy. I was wrong. Life doesn't show mercy to men like me. Men who split their hands on an axe handle every morning just to eat at night. Men who smile at their daughters so she doesn't see the terror behind their eyes. Men who owe money to someone who would rather watch you bleed than give you one extra day. His name was Mohammed, the contractor. And if the devil ever wore a human face in our village, it was his. I had borrowed from him 2 years ago, a decision that haunts me even now. My daughter Newsrat had fallen sick, and the medicines weren't cheap. I had no choice. Mohammed had smiled when he handed me the money. A slow, patient smile, like a spider that already knows the fly has landed in the web. I didn't understand that smile then. I understand it now. Every morning, I would wake before dawn, wrap my aching hands around the handle of my axe, and walk into the forest. I was 63 years old doing the work of a young man, because I was terrified of what would happen if I stopped. My body had betrayed me the way people eventually betray each other, slowly, painfully, one broken piece at a time. My back screamed. My knees shook. My hands bled through cracked skin. But I kept going. I always kept going. Newsrat would stop me at the door every morning. She was 22, beautiful in the way her mother had been beautiful, with eyes that held more wisdom than her age deserved. She would look at me and say, "Baba, please rest. You don't have the strength anymore." And I would smile and say, "Who else is going to pay for your wedding, my girl?" I tried to make it sound like a joke. It wasn't a joke. That day, the day everything changed, I was in the forest when a stranger appeared on the path ahead of me. He was well-dressed, unexpected, and completely out of place among the trees. He looked at my axe and asked if I was a woodcutter. I told him yes. And then, without warning, his expression shifted. He told me the king had banned the cutting of trees. That anyone caught doing it would face severe punishment, imprisonment, even execution. My blood ran cold. I had no idea. Out here in our small corner of the world, news traveled slowly and poverty traveled faster. I had been cutting wood to survive, not to break the law. I waited for him to threaten me. I expected it. And he delivered. He said if I wanted him to stay quiet, I would have to pay him. That was the moment I broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. I simply broke, the way old wood breaks, without sound, without drama, just a quiet shattering. Tears fell from my eyes before I could stop them. I'm not ashamed of that anymore. A man who has carried everything alone for 2 years, who wakes every morning not knowing if today is the day he loses his child to slavery, that man is allowed to cry. The stranger watched me weep. And then something strange happened. His face changed. He reached into his coat, and he pulled out a heavy pouch. The sound it made when he set it in my trembling hands, that soft, dense clink of gold, I will never forget it. He told me there were gold coins inside. Enough to pay off Mohammed. Enough to give Newsrat a proper wedding. He said he had never done a good deed in his life, and perhaps God would forgive some of his sins if he did one now. Then he told me to leave quickly, and I did. I walked through the forest feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, warm, terrifying hope. It sat in my chest like a fire I was afraid to trust. I clutched that pouch against my ribs the entire walk home. But the road was long and my body was old, and somewhere beneath a shaded tree, exhaustion pulled me under. I sat down just for a moment. Just to breathe. I woke up to empty hands. The pouch was gone. I searched the ground around me, tearing at the earth with my broken fingernails. Nothing. I called out into the empty forest. Silence answered me. That hope that had lit my chest, it didn't flicker out. It exploded. And what replaced it was something dark and hollow and very, very cold. I walked home like a ghost. Newsrat saw my face and knew immediately. She sat beside me and listened as I told her everything. The stranger, the gold, the tree, the sleep, the loss. She didn't cry. She took my hands in hers, and she looked at me the way her mother used to look at me when things were bad. Like she was building a wall around us with her eyes alone. And then the door opened. Mohammed walked in without knocking. He never knocked. He owned everything he touched, and he wanted you to know it. He looked at me the way he always did, like a man inspecting livestock before deciding what to do with it. He said the time had come. He wanted his money. I told him the truth. I told him about the gold coins, about the stranger, about the theft. I watched his expression while I spoke. Not a flicker of belief crossed his face. Only amusement. He said men like me were always full of creative stories. He said he'd heard better lies from children. Then he looked at Newsrat. The way he looked at her made my hands curl into fists so tight I felt the scabs on my knuckles crack open. He said he'd do me a kindness. He said she should marry him. She would live well. She would want for nothing. And my remaining years would be comfortable ones. Newsrat's voice was like cold iron when she refused him. She said she would never stand beside a man who built his comfort on the suffering of others. She said it simply, directly, without trembling. I have never been more proud of anyone in my life. Mohammed's smile didn't waver. He said fine. If the debt wasn't paid within 1 month, we would both become his servants. He would work me until my bones turned to dust, and he would take whatever he wanted from everything I had. Then he straightened his coat, looked around our small home with contempt, and left. That night, I sat beneath the open sky and made a deal with whatever was listening. I said, "Give me one more chance. Just one. And I will not waste it." In the forest the next day, I returned to the same tree. I don't know what drew me back. Perhaps grief. Perhaps habit. Perhaps the desperate instinct of a man who had nothing left but the place where his luck had run out. I sat against the rough bark and stared at the ground where the pouch had been, as though staring hard enough might conjure it back. And then footsteps approached. A man came through the trees, ragged clothes, hollow cheeks, but something restless and guilty in his eyes. He stopped when he saw me. He stared. And then he reached beneath his coat and pulled out the pouch. He placed it on the ground in front of me. He told me everything. He was poor, genuinely, desperately poor, the way I understood poverty because I had lived inside it my whole life. His children were hungry. His wife was desperate. He had found me sleeping and taken the coins, telling himself that a man who carried such wealth couldn't be suffering the way he was suffering. He had run home feeling like he'd saved his family. But his wife had stopped him. He told me that she'd wept when he showed her the coins. Not from joy. From shame. She had said she would rather starve with her dignity than feed her children with someone else's misery. She had sent him back to find me, no matter how long it took. I looked at this man, this thief who had stolen from a drowning man, who had been turned back by his wife's conscience, and I felt something loosen inside my chest. I thought about all the ways life had been cruel to us both. I thought about how desperation makes criminals of ordinary men. And I thought about the wife who had refused to let that happen. I told him I forgave him. And I meant it. I walked home with the pouch pressed against my heart. I told Newsrat. She wept, not from sadness, but from the kind of relief that breaks through you all at once, like a dam collapsing. We held each other in that small dark room, and for the first time in 2 years, I slept without nightmares. 1 month passed. Mohammed arrived at our door right on time. He was the kind of man who was always on time when it came to collecting what he believed he was owed. He looked at me standing in the doorway and I watched him already calculating. How much work could he get out of these old hands? How long before they gave out completely? What to do with the daughter? I held out the pouch. I watched his face as he heard the coins shift inside it. Something moved across his expression. Surprise, then suspicion, then a scrambling kind of fury that he was trying desperately to disguise as calm. He demanded to know where I had gotten gold. He said it couldn't be real. He said men like me didn't have gold. I said, count it. It's all there. Every coin you're owed. And not one more. He counted it. Slowly. Twice. His fingers moved over each coin like he was looking for a flaw, an excuse, a reason to reject it. But it was real and it was correct and there was nothing he could say. The debt was paid. Legally. Completely. Before witnesses. Because by now, several neighbors had drifted close enough to watch. They had all felt Mohammed's shadow over their own lives. They watched him run out of options in real time, and I saw the quiet satisfaction on their faces. Mohammed looked up from the coins and his eyes were ugly with something beyond anger. This was personal to him now. He had been so certain he would own us. He had already decided what our suffering would look like. And now that certainty had been ripped away by a pouch of gold coins and a woodcutter who refused to give up. He straightened. He forced the smile back onto his face, that spider's smile. He said, "Clever old man." He said he'd be watching. He said things had a way of balancing out. I said, "So do debts." He left. The neighbors cheered. Quietly, under their breath, the way people cheer when they're not quite sure the danger is fully gone. And I stood in the doorway of my small home and breathed the cleanest air I had tasted in 2 years. In the weeks that followed, the story of what happened spread through the village the way these stories always do, carried on the wind from one doorstep to the next. The stranger who gave gold to a desperate old man. The thief whose wife turned him back. The debt that was paid against every odds stacked against it. People began to look at Mohammed differently. Not with fear anymore. With something closer to clarity. They started to see what he was because they'd seen what he could be stopped by decency, by conscience, by an old man who refused to sell his daughter. Mohammed lost 3 other contracts that season. I heard from people who knew people. I don't know the details and I didn't ask. But I know that in small communities, reputation is currency, and his had been devalued. Newsrat was married 3 months later. A good man, younger than her, with steady hands and kind eyes and the kind of laugh that fills a room. I walked her down the path to his door and I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because the struggle was over. It wasn't, entirely. I was still old. My hands still ached. The forest was still the forest. But I walked her there as a free man. As her father. Not as Mohammed's debtor. Not as a broken thing waiting to be used up. That matters. God, that matters. I think about the stranger in the forest sometimes. I never saw him again. I don't know his name. I don't know what sins he carried or whether God forgave them. I only know that he looked at a weeping old man and chose, in one sudden moment, to be something other than what he had always been. Maybe that's all any of us can do. Choose, in one sudden moment, to be something better. I think about the thief's wife too. A woman I never met who sent her husband back through the forest to return what wasn't his. Who chose hunger over stolen comfort. There are people like that in the world. In the darkest corners of it, in the most desperate circumstances, there are people who simply will not let go of what's right. I didn't know that, fully, until her choice saved mine. And I think about Mohammed sometimes. Less now than before. I hope he is haunted. Not destroyed. I'm not a man who wishes destruction on others anymore. I don't have the energy for hatred now that I'm not fueled by fear. But I hope he is haunted. By the image of me standing in that doorway holding out the coins. By the neighbors who watched. By the quiet, devastating fact that he did not win. I survived him. My daughter survived him. And we did it without becoming him. That is the revenge that matters. Not violence. Not ruin. Just survival, clean, whole, and on your own terms. Just the ability to look at the man who tried to own you and say, "You don't get to have this. You never did." Newsrat called me last week. Her voice was bright and full and alive. She said she was happy. She laughed at something in the background and the sound of it traveled through the phone and into my chest like warm light. I sat by the window afterward for a long time. Outside, the trees moved in the evening wind. My axe leaned against the wall. My hands rested in my lap. For 63 years, I was told that men like me don't get happy endings. We get survival if we're lucky, and burial if we're not. But I'm sitting here, in my small quiet home, with the debt paid and my daughter married and the sound of her laughter still echoing in my ears. And I think, maybe that is the ending after all. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind where the villain is dragged through the streets or the hero stands triumphant on a hill. Just this. Just the quiet. Just the knowledge that you held on long enough to reach the other side. Just the fact that you did not break.